I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you were saying. As I understood it, you're saying that children should always have access or involvement with both parents, whatever the circumstances. So would that, for example, include a circumstance where, say, a father has raped their child, or where they've murdered the mother, or vice versa, the mother's murdered the father? Because in England and Wales, we have laws and we have procedures which would militate against that for very good reason, because we don't want another Caden Mancuso killed by his father during contact. We don't want another Sarah Sharif. We don't want another Jack and Luke Throssell killed by their father during court-ordered contact. We don't want another Cassie Hassanovic murdered in front of her children after a Hague judge sent her back to Australia. So I just want to know, in this, contact must always happen approach, where do you draw the line? And also, just to realise, and I know I'm sounding emotional about this, many people, we all have our backgrounds and we find this triggering, and there's lots of people listening online who are finding this really triggering. I'm sorry.
Did you hear the question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can.
Okay. Adrian, your question and what you've explained is actually extremely critical. And so, of course, the access needs to be taken under consideration of the specifics of each case. And so, of course, what does access mean? For example, convicted felons in the States, abusive parents, may be imprisoned, but they do have means of access. Of course, it's behind a thick glass wall or window. We have to take the risk, the effectiveness of protective measures. All of these things must be considered. I'm not going to say, oh, everyone has the same means of access, the same forms of access. They're all particulars of each case. And you've explained many tragedies in your question. Life is a matter of risk itself, and we have to minimize that to the absolute extent that we can. In my life, I've lived in California. They have earthquakes all the time. I've lived in Tokyo, Japan for 30 years. They have earthquakes all the time, but still I live there. So if there is, in fact, the risk of each particular case and documented abuse and convictions, then clearly that access needs to be considered appropriately for that particular case. And as I said, what I'm talking about is forward-looking and aspirational. Many jurisdictions may not have the facilities to provide sufficient protection for children. All of that must be considered. I'm not, blindly saying everyone has the same form of access and everything's perfectly fine. We don't need to worry about risk. All the more reason we must be extremely vigilant and careful in deciding the means and conditions of access. By all means, I certainly agree. And of course, if there are laws in certain jurisdictions, well, so be it. I'm not going to say anything to that. But to the extent possible, with all due precautions, it would be advisable for some means of access and healing and reconciliation to the extent possible, with all reasonable precaution. I do appreciate your question. It's certainly valid. I certainly appreciate it. These are facts. I understand that. And I would say at the outset, domestic violence is extremely horrendous and completely unacceptable.
Thank you, John. It appears we may have time for one more question and answer. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I actually have one question and one observation. So, but they have one point in common, and this My question would be actually to the Belgian case that was presented. And the question would be actually whether the mother, who lived for 10 years, we found out, and who was allegedly subject to horrific domestic violence. My question was whether she sought help from social services and was denied it, whether she reported violence to the police and was denied it, and thus she found fleeing the country as the only solution. Because if it was so indeed, then her suffering had begun much earlier than it was indicated. It was actually caused by the failure of social services and country in which she resided for 10 years at least. My second observation, and this ties of course to what was said by one of the speakers yesterday. Also, the child was born and lived in Belgium apparently for over 10 years, so I